We have just finished goal 1, which is to make spiky circle with bouncer. Now our next goal is going to be to make that symbol rotate. We're going to do that inside of another nested symbol. So let's go over and take a quick look at where we're going with this. And I'll make it play here, and you can see, okay, there's that original spiky circle with the bouncer in it, which is bouncing just back and forth. Now it itself is turning. So what's happened is an instance of that spiky circle with bouncer has been placed on this timeline of another symbol, which I'm calling spiky circle with bouncer rotate, and it's been tweened there in order to make one complete revolution every 6 seconds. Okay, so let's go back to Flash, and we will continue on here. Okay, so here we are. We're on the main timeline. Here we have our instance of spiky circle with bouncer. This is that one that we placed on the main timeline. Let's wrap this in a new symbol. Once you get used to doing this, taking things that are on the stage, converting to a symbol to make a new container. So we're going to convert this to symbol, and we're going to call this, boy, this name's getting kind of long, spiky circle with bouncer underscore rotate. Okay, I just like making these words up, is what I really like. Alrighty, so we're going to click OK. And now again, we're looking at spiky circle with bouncer rotate. We're going to go ahead and double click here. Edit bar is telling me that this is the timeline of spiky circle with bouncer rotate. Properties panel is telling me that we're looking at a circle. Well, I'm remembering that that's what it says, but that it's the spiky circle with bouncer. I'm going to make it rotate on this timeline. And I want my rotation here to be 6 seconds long. Okay, I want to make the one revolution every 6 seconds. If I did my math right, that would be 144 frames. So we're going to come down the timeline here to 144. Simply make a keyframe with F6. Alrighty. Now I can click anywhere in the middle here to add my classic tween. And anything that I do with this tween selected, it's actually giving me the properties for the frame 1. And that's the way it works inside of a classic tween, is anywhere you select here, the properties you change will be for the first frame of the tween. So for this first frame of the tween, the property we're going to change is the rotation. We're going to change it to clockwise, and it gets this default of 1. And that's pretty good. That's pretty much most of our work done right there. We're going to take a quick look at it. And we did just see a bit of a glitch, and that actually I think was flash playback. Sometimes that happens. But there is a glitch in here. Let's see if there it was. You see that? Coming up. It's very fine. But what we're seeing there is this glitch that happens when we go from the last frame in the timeline. That's this one. Okay, this is frame 144. Look at the position of this thing. Back to the first frame, look at the position of this thing. It's exactly the same. Anytime you have doubled up frames, like when this timeline loops, you're going to see a bit of a glitch, because in between those two frames there's not going to be any motion, whereas between each of the other frames we're having this slight bit of rotation. Okay, so here's how to fix it. I know we've talked about this before, but I'm going to give you the steps really simple without any explanation so that you'll be able to remember them. Let's go ahead and make our frames a little bit bigger, and we're going to go to the end of the timeline. I'm going to go ahead and center it here. This is the end of my tween. Okay, here's how you fix the glitch. First thing, click one frame before the end of your tween, hit F6 or insert keyframe. Okay, that's created a keyframe with it at the step right next to the end. Okay, now we're going to take this keyframe, I'm going to zoom in here for you, and we're simply going to drag it one frame over. So what it's actually going to do is overwrite the old keyframe, the old ending keyframe. Okay, so we've just kept our tween the same length, but we cut out that last frame, and all the degrees, all the angles adjust, and this one here is going to be a little bit different, but it's going to be close enough. Now When we made that new keyframe, it actually copied over the tween property. You can see that this is purple in the background. It's not hurting anybody like this since this is the end of the timeline, but just to be tidy, come in here and remove that tween. Come on, let me see that. Come on, come on, come on. There we go. So we've removed that tween. We're going to zoom back out here. Okay. We're not quite done yet. One last step, and that is, since this is not making an entire rotation anymore, we need to come up, we need to select the tween and come in here to our rotation setting and have it rotate clockwise still, but we want 0 complete rotations because we want it to make almost a full rotation, but not a complete rotation. So those are your steps to fix the glitch. Okay, we're going to go ahead and test this. And when I fix the glitch in the future, I'm going to do it really, really fast without zooming or anything. But we have just finished our goal number 2. We've got our spiky circle with bouncer rotating. So we'll take a look at goal number 3 playing, and that is to build our wagon wheel circle. Our wagon wheel symbol, I should say. Now, if you look at our wagon wheel, I'm calling this spoked wheel. Okay, so this thing is actually rotating a little bit more slowly. This is actually rotating over 192 frames, which is 8 seconds. You're going to see that this process is really just the same as the one we just did for the spiky circle with bouncer. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to Flash, go back to our main timeline. You know what? We can do this one a number of different ways. We're not really combining anything here. So let's just go ahead and do this the other way, just so that you see me doing things both ways. I'm going to delete this instance from the stage because it's in the library. We're going to go into the symbol editor and choose Insert New Symbol. I am going to call this one Spoked Wheel Rotate. MovieClip, yes. We're going to come out here and drag an instance of Spoked Wheel art to the stage. And you will find with making these symbols these different ways, eventually you're just going to become familiar enough with it that it just is second nature, and the way that you choose to make the symbol is usually going to be based on, well, what's the easiest right now? Okay, here's our instance of Spoked Wheel art. It's on the timeline of Spoked Wheel Rotate. We will make our frames back to normal so it's easier to scroll through here. And I did say that I want this to be 8 seconds long, so that means oops, I'm a little too far. I need to go out here to frame 192 right here, F6 or insert keyframe. Alrighty, come back to our middle here, and we're going to create a classic tween. We're going to choose to rotate clockwise 1 time. Now we need to fix the glitch, so insert a keyframe at the next to the last frame, drag it over the current last frame, remove the tween, select the tween, come back and change this to 0 times rotating, and if we put this out on our timeline here, Spoked Wheel Rotate, and test our movie. Wow, that was fast. You're going to see that you start getting really fast at this kind of thing. Now, the next thing that we want is to combine both of these symbols that we've made, spiky wheel with bouncer rotate and spoked wheel rotate. I'm just going to put them both on stage so that we can see what they're both doing. And you can see that one is moving much faster than the other. Now, you could just put them on different layers here on the main timeline, or put them together on the main timeline like they are here, but that's not good enough, because if you'll remember, our next thing is we're going to arrange these things in 3D space. In order to do that, they need to be inside of a MovieClip, and then we're going to move them around, so we've got some more nesting to do. Okay, so let's go ahead, delete these from the main timeline, or not. How about this? We've got these 2 instances. We want to combine them. Hey, it's as simple as aligning them. And we don't care where they're aligned, we just care that they're aligned to each other. So go to our Align panel. In this case, I am going to, I could leave Align to Stage on if I wanted. I don't have to. This will put them both in the center. Okay, so we've got them aligned. Remember, right now we have 2 separate instances that are on the main stage. However, we make sure that we've got them all selected, and now we're going to convert to symbol. And we were going to call this spiky and spoked. We're going to imply rotate or just remember that it's rotating. We click OK, and look at that. Now we're looking at an instance of spiky and spoked. Let's test our movie to make sure everything's okay. Hey, not bad. And look, we can see that the spiky is traveling faster, so we've got this kind of cool thing. What are we missing, though? We are missing that drop shadow on the spiky wheel. So it's actually not standing out quite as well as I'd like for it to. It's blending in a little bit too much with that wagon wheel kind of thing. So we need to go inside of this symbol, spiky and spoked, and start working with these other two instances separately. So let's go ahead inside and we'll see, hey, look at that. We're inside spiky and spoked. Since we converted two symbol instances into this new symbol, they're just both sitting here on layer 1. I'm not so fond of that. I like my layers named, and I like to be able to select things and deal with them separately. So I want these on their own layers. Remember, we've got modify, timeline, distribute to layers, and that's going to take everything that's selected and put it on its own keyframe on its own layer. And even nicer than that, it's going to give the layer the name of the symbol instance, if there is a symbol instance on that layer. Okay. Layer 1 is just empty because that's where everything came from. I'm going to delete that. Now we've got same thing. We've just distributed them to layers. I want spiky circle with bouncer rotate to have the drop shadow on it. So we're going to lock this one just so I don't choose it by mistake. Remember, with MovieClip instances, you have the option of putting filter effects on them. So I close my library so we have some room here. Filter effects are going to be down here towards the bottom of the properties panel when you have the symbol instance selected. So make sure you've got the right thing selected. And you may not see this. The properties panel does get scrollable if it's too big, if it's too tall to fit in. I'm going to come down to filters and choose add filter. We're going to put a drop shadow on this. It is going to default to 100%, which is kind of strong. I mean, that's really dark. I do like to be a little more subtle with my drop shadows. This is going to be something that's moving kind of fast. So I'm not going to turn it down as much as I usually turn it down. I'm just going to make its strength 75%. This thing is sitting fairly close. So I'm not going to blur it so much. That's a blur is how much the shadow spreads. And a much more blurred shadow and a shadow with your distance that's further away tends to make us think that something is farther. So we're just going to leave these at the default settings, which I can't remember what the distance default, I think it was 4. Okay, spiky and spoked. Let's go ahead and test our movie. And you're going to see, hey, look at that. We have just finished another goal. Okay, next one is going to be to place these inside of a 3D symbol. Okay, so goal 5 is to add some 3D to this. And as we saw in the previous lecture, 3D is really this matter of arranging flat artwork on the Z axis. Now you've got your X and Y axis. That's, X is horizontal, Y is vertical. The Z axis is your 3D axis, and that's the one that comes right out of the picture plane. So it's actually coming from that origin there and pointing out to you. Okay, so we do that through the properties panel, but let's look at where we're going. This is our 3D symbol. Now what we have done is we've taken 4 instances of spiky and spoked. We've placed those 4 instances inside of another MovieClip, which I'm calling spiky and spoked 3D. Now we've moved 3 of the instances back in Z space. That means we've changed their index on the Z axis. We've also added a little bit of darkening to them to make them look like they're getting further in the back. We've also added a bit of a drop shadow here as well. So let's see how that works. We're going to go back to Flash. Same old movie. I'm going to go back to the main timeline and delete everything. Working with 3D is definitely something that's easier to do, at least for me, my way my head works, in the Insert New Symbol mode. That is, working in the symbol editor, without looking at the context. If you edit in context, what happens is you start to see some differences that are based on the location of the symbol instance on the stage, because once we have 3D, we start dealing with a vanishing point. So let's go ahead and choose Insert New Symbol. We're going to call this one Spiky and Spoked. Someday I'm going to get cats and name them Spiky and Spoked. Underscore 3D. Okay. I'm going to do something a little bit tricky, but it's just to be fast here. What I'm going to do is bring out an instance of Spiky and Spoked. That's that symbol that we just made. Reminding you, we are on the timeline of Spiky and Spoked 3D. We've just brought out an instance of Spiky and Spoked. I'm going to go ahead and align this so that it's right aligned with its left-hand corner of its bounding box, right there on the registration point. Now here comes the tricky part. I actually want 4 instances of this symbol because I'm going to move them back into space. Okay, so I could do that a number of different ways. I'm going to make my frame a little bit bigger so we can see more easily. Panel menu doesn't want to open up. There we go, medium. Okay, what I'm going to do here is copy this. And then come in and choose Paste in Place. Remember, Command V is paste. Add Shift to that because Shift always adds order. That's going to paste it in exactly the same place. Now, it doesn't look like I've changed anything, right? But actually, I have 2 symbol instances right there. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to paste in place again. Now I actually have 3 instances. I'm going to paste in place again. Now I have 4 instances. I could prove it to myself by dragging them off, or I could just believe that it worked. Another way to find out if it worked, select all, modify, timeline, distribute to layers. There we have it. 4 layers of Spiky and Spoked and our empty layer, which I'm just going to delete really quickly. And why is that empty layer still there? Well, Flash leaves it there because maybe you didn't select everything to distribute to layers. Maybe you had other artwork. So Flash doesn't automatically delete that, even though it could probably check to see if it's empty and delete it if it is. But by default, it just leaves it there. Now I have my 4 layers. Let's think about how I want to arrange these. I want my frontmost instance to just be at z equals 0. Now I already predetermined by just experimenting around that I want to organize these 200 pixels apart in z space. So this first one's okay, so I'm just going to leave it alone. And in order to leave it alone, I'm just going to hide it. Everything looks the same, but if I select what's available, what's visible, you can see from the highlighting here that it's actually this second layer that's now selected. I'm going to set its z index to 200. Now we'll start to see the difference. Hey, look at that. It moved it to the back. This is actually the next one down that we're seeing. Okay, that's where I want it to be. So I will go ahead and hide that. Select this one. Notice we've got the next one here. Let's put this one at 400. Now, as you're doing this with other movies and stuff, you may have to just fool around with this to get it at the right space. Remember, you can always drag these things, and you can see what you've got. A lot of this is trial and error until you get used to it. Let me go back to where it was at 400. Hide that. And it's important that I hide these as I'm doing this because it really makes it, keeps me from confusing things. And we're going to show them all in a second here. But since I'm doing this all by the numbers, it helps. 200, let's see, 0, 200, 400. This one gets 600. Okay, now let's see what we just made. We're going to show all the layers, and look at that. We have a symbol where these instances of our rotating spiky spoked complicatedness is actually receding back in space. Alrighty, I need to put a drop shadow on this. Now I could go through and put a drop shadow on each of these, or I could go into the symbol itself and put a drop shadow. Now, which you choose depends. Like if I really wanted the drop shadow to change between these instances, I would probably go in and individually put a drop shadow on each of these instances. I don't really care right now. So what I'm actually going to do is come in here, and instead we're coming inside of spiky and spoked, and we're going to put the drop shadow here on this instance of spoked wheel rotate. Since all these things are movie clips, that's an okay thing to do. That way, since we have 4 instances of spiky and spoked, that means that if I update it here, it'll update everywhere. Okay, so let's go ahead and hide that library. We're going to add a filter and drop shadow. This one we want to be much more subtle. So what we're going to do is change the blur to about 10. I think I'll put the strength at 75 again, at least until proven up. Ooh, what did I do? Hey, 751. No. You can go over 100% with this strength. 76, close enough. What happened was I had, instead of the tab button, I had my finger on the 1 button. Now, just because, let's move this to a little bit higher distance. Let's do this. This is much more pronounced and darker than my example that I showed you, but I'm going to say that's okay, especially since we're demonstrating here. It'll be easier to see. Okay, now what about that darkening? If I did the darkening here, that would apply to all the instances, just like the drop shadow. What I'm trying to talk about here is the logic of when and where you do things. So actually, let's go back to spiky and spoked 3D. That's where we had 4 different instances. Now remember, I was saying that I would apply the drop shadow if I wanted it to be different for each one of these, like maybe getting stronger or weaker as we went back. I'd apply it here. But I didn't, because I wanted it to be the same. However, I want the darkening to be different. Okay, so in that case, yes, this is where I'm going to apply the darkening. Okay, so, or actually I shouldn't call it darkening, I'm going to change the brightness setting, so I'm going to call it brightness lessening. Okay, select this first one. I'm going to come to color and effect here and choose brightness. We're going to take it down. Well, my default, yeah, that was the last setting I used. That's a little bit too much. How about -20? Let's take this next one, and here we're going to go to -40. And this one, we'll come back and do brightness to -60. And this looks like these settings are probably more than I had in my example, but that's okay. It gives us more dramatic effect, which will be easier to see. So now we have this 3D symbol that we've made. We've made these things go off into the depths, the darkness. Let's see what happens when one of these gets placed on the stage. We're going back to our main timeline. Remember, I made that in the symbol editor. I didn't make that an instance on the stage. I did that for a specific reason. Watch what happens when we drag an instance of this out to the stage. Hey, where'd my 3D go? What happened? This symbol instance has all these things receding in the back. Why don't I see them here? They are here, but they are fading back to what we call the vanishing point. And the vanishing point is something that you can manipulate. Hide the library again. The vanishing point is manipulated with this setting right here. Okay, you can kind of see that icon. That's really hard for me to see, but it's it looks like that's the vanishing point, and these are things receding to it. But this is giving me a vanishing point of 350, 200. That's going to be right in the center since my stage is 700 by 400. Watch this. If I come up here and start messing with this, see those 2 crosshairs? That actually is showing us where the vanishing point is. So look at what happens as I move over to the right. Okay, they are receding in space towards that vanishing point. Here's something really cool. As I move this thing around on stage, they will move in 3D towards that vanishing point. However, this is not the way I wanted it. This is not the way it was in my example. Actually, in my example, vanishing point was at the center. Let's see if reset. Yep, reset puts it right back square at the center. Now, if I put my symbol instance down at the lower right-hand corner, like it was in the preview, We will zoom in here just to make sure it's absolutely perfect. Let's go ahead and put X at 0. It gets a little bit tricky working with your X and Y coordinates whenever you start getting into 3D, because what happens is you start, the actual symbol is bigger and it's different depending on where it is on stage, so a lot of that becomes a little less trustworthy. Like, look at that. This is showing me that over the edge. So when you work with 3D, especially placing 3D symbols or 3D symbols that have stuff in them, a lot of times you'll need to come down and do it by eye. Also here, that filter is making it look a little bit taller, and there it will be just a decision to you whether you want your filter to fall off the edge or not. I do in this case. Okay. If we test our movie now, we're going to find that what we've just created was our next to the last goal. We've only got one goal left. Right now, we have our 3D symbol, and it is sitting there, and all of its nested symbols are rotating around merrily. The bouncing ball, that very first thing we did, is still bouncing in the center, and you can see that it's bouncing on these instances that go back into space as well. You might experiment with doing something like this with transparent symbols. Change the alpha of these symbols so that you could actually see stuff going through. One last step, and that is to make this thing go around. Let's take a look at that goal. Now this is kind of cool because you get to actually see the influence of that vanishing point. See, our vanishing point is right down here, so everything is receding towards that. So as this goes around, the appearance of that symbol changes based on where it is on stage. Now, you could do this on the main timeline, but since our theme tonight is movies with only one frame on the main timeline, we're going to nest this in yet another symbol. Okay? Let's go ahead and do that, and this symbol is going to be follow the perimeter. Okay, so here is our symbol instance. This is Spiky and Spoked 3D. We're going to wrap it in another symbol. Again, this is something we want to edit in the context of our stage. So as we tween it to move, we want to tween it based on where it is positioned. So this is another good time to convert to symbol and edit in place or edit in context. Okay, what shall we call this? Spiky and Spoked. Can't type anymore. I'm just going to call this follow perimeter. Alrighty, so I have this perimeter. I have this movie stage that is 700 by 400 pixels. So as you're starting to think about how you want to tween something, how long should your tweens be? We want to think about, well, it's going to take longer for it to go from one side to the other than it is to go up. Since our size is 700 by 400, we actually have a fraction there. So for every frame here, this frame of span of frames, going up is going to be like 407 or something like that. So I'm actually going to do this kind of cheating because I worked these out beforehand, but I didn't write them down. Well, let's see. Let's say we are just going to start off by making this thing make the tween from left to right in 70 frames, bottom to top in 40 frames. Okay? Now there is the width of everything, but as long as I'm consistent, as long as this at corners, that should be about right. We can always adjust our tweens later on. Now, let's go ahead, and we're on our main timeline still, aren't we? Always check up here. Your edit bar tells you where you are. So before we start adding frames or anything, we want to check up here and make sure what timeline it is we're looking here. This is the main timeline, not where I would want to do my animation. I want to do it inside. So I just double-clicked Spiky and Spoked follow perimeter. And let's go ahead and make our frames normal again. We're going to collapse that down so we can see a bit more. Now, I said 70 and 40. Okay, so it's going to take 70 frames to get across. So come up to 70, hit F6 to create a keyframe. And here we will just move it straight to the right. I'm going to hold down Shift again. And oops. Got a little out of control there. Hold down Shift and drag to the right. And this is going to be one of those places where you do want to eyeball it again. And again, decide whether you want your drop shadow to stay on the stage or hang off. I'm going to make it hang off, so I'm going to zoom in like so. Zoom back out. Okay, there's our keyframe there. I said 40, so 70 plus 40 is 110. Let's make our new keyframe here. F6, remember that. Make a new keyframe. And here we want to go to the top. Hold down Shift again and drag it up. Zoom in and just nudge it right up there. And what is 110 plus 70? That's 180. Notice I haven't put my tweens on. You could go ahead and put your tweens on if you wanted to. I just, as you start to work more quickly and kind of know where you're going and know what to expect things to look like, you can start doing things in a more efficient way. So let's go ahead and 180, we're going to drag all the way over here. Zoom back in. Nudge, 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 nudge. This position, I could get, and probably should get, this x coordinate from the first frame, so it's going to come in a straight line. So let's come back here and check our first frame, and this x coordinate is 2. So I'm going to go back to the end. I'm just going to make that match. 2. Another 40 would take us to 220. F6 for a keyframe. We'll zoom out just a little bit. Shift and drag straight down. Again, this position is kind of important because this is where our timeline is going to loop. So I want to make sure that it comes back to exactly the same place it was where it started. And we saw that the X was 2. I don't remember what the Y was, so let's go back and check. Y was also 2. So come back to the end. Oh, look at that, I was -4. So I'll put 2 here, like so. And whenever you're doing something like this, remember these keys down here, these buttons. This button takes you to the last frame. This button takes you to the first frame. Now, whenever you're dealing with something that's looping, like this timeline, we'll center that. So 220 back to 1, that's an important transition, okay? Because that's when it loops. You're going to actually see that. And if things are not right, you're going to see a glitch there. So kind of nice to go back and forth between these buttons. First keyframe, last keyframe. I can see a tiny little shift there, but it's not enough to make a difference. Okay. This also works inside of your symbols, especially if you've got a looping symbol. It's good to make sure that the right thing is happening. You know, that you don't have this discontinuity between the last and the first ones. Now, the one thing is, though, that we do want that last step. And this is going to be the same thing as fixing the glitch on the rotating things that we did earlier. But we can't do that till we have our tweens in place. So we're going to start on frame 1. We're going to create a classic tween. Okay, we're going to go to our next one. Create another classic tween. Go to our next keyframe. And really, whenever I click here and create a classic tween, what it's really doing is setting the tween property for the previous keyframe. Just like whenever you work on static frames, it's really working on the previous keyframe. Create another classic tween. And let's test our movie. I can't remember. Yes, we have an instance on stage. And it looks like we're almost done. If this were moving too fast or too slow, what I'd want to do is go into each of those tweens and either add frames or remove frames. But I'd want to do it keeping that kind of 4:7 ratio so that things would go the same speed. Now I'm going to see if I can see a glitch when it gets down to the bottom, when it gets down to where the main time or this timeline loops. I do see a bit of one. Can you see that? just the tiniest glitch. And we'll see that we fix this in exactly the same way we fix the glitch. So let's go do that, and we are done for the night. Okay, remember, fix the glitch. Put a keyframe right before the last keyframe. Drag that keyframe over the last keyframe so it replaces it. This keyframe does have a tween property, and that would be a tween for the next few frames rather than this previous one, because the last keyframe never has the tween applied to it. So we want to remove the tween from that last keyframe. This time we don't need to worry about rotation, do we? Because we're not rotating, so we don't have to worry about, that 0 thing. This is just making it so that whenever this timeline loops, it's in this position at the last keyframe, and then next keyframe it makes it down. Okay, and if we look at this, the difference between these two frames is very similar to the difference between the last keyframe and the next to last keyframe. Remember, we're just doing steps here. Alrighty, we are finished. We have fixed the glitch, and we have finished, what was that? I think that was goal number 6. And we have finished our complex one-frame movie. And just to remind you, all this good stuff here is happening with only one keyframe, one frame only on the main timeline. Alrighty, well, thank you very much, and we will see you next time.